Hello, how are you guys doing? I wanted to read to you the story Heidi. It's one of the books I read when I was younger. It's called Heidi. It's by Johanna Spyri. It's a classic. As you can see, it's about a girl who lives with the goats. So I'm going to go ahead and start. It's an older book. This is a really old copy, which is kind of cool. Smells good. Okay, so there's a part 1 and a part 2. We're going to start part 1, chapter 1. I'll show you the first page. Here's the illustration. Heidi. The Alm Uncle. From the pleasantly situated old town of Mayenfeld, a footpath leads up through shady green meadows to the foot of the mountains. Anyone who follows it will soon catch the pungent fragrance of grassy pasture lands, for the footpath goes up straight and steep to the Alps. One bright, sunny June morning, a tall, sturdy-looking girl, evidently a native of the mountains, was climbing this narrow path. She led by the hand a little girl, whose cheeks glowed as if there were a flame under her dark skin. And what wonder? In spite of the hot June sun, the child was bundled up as if for protection against the keenest cold. She could not have been 5 years old, but it was impossible to tell anything about her natural figure, for she wore 2 or 3 dresses, one over the other, and a big red cotton handkerchief around her neck. Her feet seemed lost in heavy hobnailed shoes as she made her hot and laborious way up the mountain. At the end of an hour of steady climbing, the 2 girls came to the hamlet that lies halfway up the Alm and is called Im Dorfli, or the little village. Here they were greeted by nearly everyone they met, for the older girl had reached her childhood home. However, she did not pause but hurried on, answering all questions and returning greetings as she walked. As she was passing the last of the scattered cottages, a voice from the doorway cried, "Wait a minute, Deet. I'll go with you if you are bound up the mountain." The big girl stopped. Immediately the child withdrew her hand and sat down on the ground. "Are you tired, Heidi?" asked her companion. "No, I am hot," replied the little girl. "We are almost there now," her companion told her encouragingly. Just then a large, pleasant-looking woman came out of the cottage. The little girl jumped to her feet and followed the 2 women up the mountain. "Really, Deet, where are you taking the child?" asked the newcomer. Is it your sister's little girl?" "It is your sister's little girl, isn't it? The orphan?" "Yes, it is," replied the other. "I'm taking her up to her grandfather. She will have to stay there." "What? The little girl is going to live with the Alm uncle? You must have lost your senses, Deet. The old man will send you back with such a scheme as that." "He can't. He's her grandfather, and it is time for him to look out for her. I have had her till now, Barbel, but I have a good position offered me in Frankfurt. I can't take the child, and her grandmother must do his part." "That's very well if you were like other men," replied the portly Barbel with indignation. "But you know what he is. He will have nothing to do with a living soul. He never sets foot in a church, and if once in a 12 months he comes down with his thick staff, everyone keeps out of his way and is afraid of him. What will he do with a child, especially with such a young one?" "Nevertheless," said Deep stubbornly, "he's her grandfather, and it's his business to look after her. He won't do her any harm. If he does, he will have to answer for it, not I." "I should like to know," said Barbel insinuatingly, "what the old man has on his conscience that makes him look so fierce and live all alone up there on the Alm and keep almost hidden from sight. People tell all sorts of stories about him. Of course you know something about it, Deet. Your sister must have told you, didn't she?" "Of course she did, but I hold my tongue. If he should hear of it, I would suffer." Barbel had long desired to know the real cause of the Alm uncle's peculiarities, but she had only recently married into the village. Before that, her home had been down in the valley at Prattigau. Her friend Deet, on the contrary, had lived in Dorfli until a year ago. Then her mother had died, and she had gone down to Raggett's, where the baths are, and found a position as a chambermaid in a hotel. She had come from Raggett's that very morning with the little girl, having had the chance to ride as far as Mayenfield on a hay wagon, which an acquaintance was driving home. Barbel thought this was a good chance to find out something. She seized Diet's arm confidentially and said, "One can learn the real truth from you instead of the gossip which is talked. Come now, tell me what is the matter with the old man. Has he always been so feared? Has he always been such a hermit?" A hermit is someone that lives all by themselves. "I can't tell whether he has always been so or not. I am 26 now, and he is certainly 70, and of course I never saw him when he was young. If I were certain that he would never again be seen in Prattigau, I might tell you all sorts of things about him. My mother was from Domlisch, and so was he." "There now, Diet, what do you mean?" exclaimed Barbara, a little offended. "You need not be so severe on our gossip in Prattigau. Besides, I can keep a secret or two if need be." "Tell me. You shan't regret it." "Well, then, I will, but mind you hold your tongue," said Diet warningly. She glanced around to see if Heidi was close enough to hear, but the child was not to be seen. She must have ceased following them some distance back, but in their lively conversation they had not noticed it. "There she is," exclaimed Barbel, pointing to a place quite distant from the path. "She is climbing up the cliffs with the goatherd Peter and his goats. Why is he so late today with his animals? But it is just as well, for he can look after the child, and you will be all the better able to talk with me." "Peter needn't trouble himself to look after her," said Diet. "She is not dull for a child of 5 years. She keeps her eyes open, and it's a good thing for her that she does. The old man has nothing to leave her but his 2 goats and his mountain hut." "And did he once have more?" asked Barbel. "He? Well, I should say that he did once have more," replied Diet warmly. "He used to have the finest farm in Domleschg, but he drank and gambled away the whole property. His mother and father died, first one, then the other, from sheer grief. Then the son disappeared, leaving nothing behind him but a bad name. It was reported that he had gone with the soldiers to Naples, and nothing more was heard of him for 12 or 15 years. Then he suddenly appeared again in Domleschg with a half-grown boy. Every door was closed to him, and this made him very bitter. He said he would never set foot in Domleschg again, and he came here to Dorfli. He had married while he was away, but his wife had died, so he and his son lived alone. He must have had some money still, for he let Tobias learn the carpenter's trade. Tobias was a steady fellow and well thought of in Dorfli. But nobody had confidence in the old man. It was said that he had gotten into trouble in Naples, that he had killed somebody in a quarrel. But we recognized the relationship, for my mother's grandmother was his grandmother's first cousin. So we called him Uncle, and as we are related to almost all the people in Dorfli, on father's side, they all call him Uncle. Ever since he went up on the Alm, he has been known as the Alm Uncle. The Alm is the mountain. "But what became of Tobias?" asked Barbel eagerly. "He married my sister Adelheid," said Diet. "They were very happy together, but it didn't last long. 2 years later, while Tobias was working on a new house, a beam fell on him and killed him. Adelheid's grief threw her into a violent fever from which she did not recover. She never was very strong, and was often in such a condition that it was almost impossible to tell whether she was asleep or awake. Only 2 weeks after Tobias's death, Adelheid, too, was buried. People said it was a judgment on the uncle for his godless life. It was even said so to his face, and he grew more surly than ever. He no longer spoke to anyone, and everyone avoided him. Suddenly it was reported that he had gone up on the Alm, and there he has stayed ever since. Mother and I took Adelheid's little child. She was a year old. Last summer Mother died, and as I wanted to work down at the baths, I took her to board with old Ursel up at Pfaffersturm. I stayed at the baths all winter, but now the lady I worked for wants to take me home with her to Frankfurt. We start day after tomorrow. It's a good place, I tell you." "And are you going to give the child to the old man up there? I'm surprised that you should think of such a thing, Diet. said Barbel reproachfully. I have done my duty, Deet retorted. I can't take a child scarcely 5 years old to Frankfurt. But where are you going, Barbel? We are halfway up the Alm now. I have reached the place where I was going. I want to speak to old goatherd Peter's wife. She does spinning for me in winter. So goodbye, Deet. Good luck to you. Deet shook her companion's hand and stood still, while Barbel went into the dilapidated little dark brown mountain hut in a hollow, where it was somewhat sheltered from the wind. Here dwelt the goatherd Peter, the 11-year-old boy who every morning went down to Dorfli to get the goats and drive them up on the Alm to feed till evening on the short, nourishing herbs. Then Peter would hurry down again with the light-footed animals, give a shrill whistle through his fingers as soon as he reached Dorfli, and all the owners would immediately come and get their goats. Little boys and girls came for the most part, for the creatures were peaceful and harmless. All through the summer it was the only time in the day when Peter associated with his fellow beings. The rest of the time he lived alone with his goats. To be sure, he had his mother and blind grandmother at home, but he had to go away very early in the morning and come back from Dorfli late in the evening. So in order to play with the children as long as possible, he spent only enough time at home to swallow his milk and bread. His father, who had also been called Peter the goatherd, because he had followed the same calling, had met with an accident some years before while felling trees. His mother, whose real name was Bridget, was still called Goatherd Peter's wife, and the blind grandmother was known by old and young simply by the name of grandmother. Deet looked around for the children with the goats, but as they were nowhere in sight, she climbed a little higher where she could have a better view of the Alm down to the foot. She peered first this way, then that, growing more and more impatient when she could not see them. Meanwhile, the children were coming by a roundabout way. Peter knew many spots where there were good shrubs and bushes for his goats to nibble, so he frequently wandered from the path with his flock. At first Heidi in her heavy garb climbed after them, panting with heat and discomfort. She looked at Peter, who jumped about without any difficulty in his bare feet and light trousers, then at the goats with their small, slender legs climbing still more easily over bushes and stones and steep crags. Suddenly she sat down on the ground and pulled off her shoes and stockings. She stood up again, took off her thick red neckerchief, unfastened her Sunday frock, quickly took that off, and began to unhook her everyday dress. This she had worn under the other to save her Aunt Deet the trouble of carrying it. Quick as lightning came off also the everyday frock, and there the child stood in her light underclothes, stretching her bare arms out of her short chemise sleeves. She laid her clothes in a neat little pile on the ground and hurried up the mountain, jumping and climbing after the goats as easily as Peter did. When she came running after him in her new costume, a grin spread over his face. He looked back and saw the little pile of clothes, and the grin grew still broader. Heidi, feeling free and light, began to talk. She had all sorts of questions to ask Peter. How many goats did he have? Where was he going with them? What would he do when he reached there? Finally, the children with the goats approached the hut and came in sight of Aunt Deet. Heidi, she screamed, what have you been doing? What is the matter with you? Where are your dresses and your neckerchief? Where are your brand new shoes and stockings I made you? The child calmly pointed down the mountain and said, There. The aunt followed the direction of her finger. You careless girl, she cried. Why did you take everything off? I didn't need them, said Heidi, not looking in the least sorry for what she had done. Oh, you careless, senseless Heidi, the aunt went on, lamenting and scolding. It will take half an hour for anyone to go down there again. Peter, run back and get the things. Be quick. Don't stand there staring at me as if you were nailed to the ground. I am late already, said Peter slowly. Deet looked at him impatiently. Come here. Do you see this? She held up a new 5-centime piece which glistened in the sunlight. Peter looked at it. Then suddenly he turned and raced down the Alm, not stopping until he reached the little pile of clothes. He picked them up and brought them back so quickly that Deet gave him his money without delay. Peter put it in his pocket, and his face lighted with a broad grin. for such a treasure did not often fall to his share. "You may carry the things on up to the uncle's as long as you're going that way," continued Aunt Deet, while she set about climbing the steep cliff which rose behind Peter's hut. The boy willingly undertook the task and followed, carrying the little bundle in his left hand and swinging his stick in his right. Heidi and the goat skipped and jumped along merrily by his side. In about 3/4 of an hour the procession reached the height where, on a jutting cliff, stood the old uncle's hut with a view of the valley below. Behind the hut stood 3 ancient fir trees with long, thick, untrimmed branches. Farther back the mountain rose higher still, with its lovely fertile pastures, surmounted with bare, steep cliffs. The uncle had made himself a seat by the side of the hut looking down into the valley. Here he sat with his pipe in his mouth, his hands resting on his knees, calmly watching the children, Aunt Deet, and the goats. Aunt Deet had gradually been left behind, and Heidi was the first to reach the hut. She went straight to the old man and held out her hand. "How do you do, grandfather?" she asked. "Well, well, what does this mean?" asked the old man roughly, giving her a long, penetrating look from under his bushy eyebrows. Heidi gazed back at him in surprise. She had never seen anyone like her grandfather, with his long beard and heavy gray eyebrows meeting in the middle of his forehead like a thicket. In the meantime, Deet had arrived with Peter, who was waiting expectantly to see what would happen. And here they give us a picture of when she meets the grandfather. "I wish you good morning, uncle," said Deet. "I have brought Tobias and Adelaide's child to you. You will hardly know her, for you haven't seen her since she was a year old." "Well, what can the child do here with me?" asked the old man curtly. Then he turned to Peter. "You there! Go along with your goats. You are none too early. Take mine too." Peter obeyed without delay and disappeared, for the uncle had made it plain that he was not wanted. "Heidi must stay with you, uncle," said Deet. "I am sure I have done my duty by her these 4 years, and now it is your turn to do what you can for her." "Indeed," said the old man, and his eyes flashed. "Suppose the child begins to fret and whine for you. What shall I do with her then?" "That is your business," retorted Deet. "I am sure no one told me what to do with the little one when she was given into my hands, only a year old, and I already had enough to do to take care of myself and mother. Now I must look out for myself, and you are next of kin to the child. If you can't have her, do what you please with her. You will have to answer for her if she comes to any harm. You don't want to have anything more laid to your charge." Deet's conscience was not quite easy, and so she became excited and said more than she had intended. The uncle rose at her last words. He gave her such a look that she took several steps backward. Then he stretched out his arm and said imperatively, "Get you down where you came from, and don't show yourself again here very soon." Deet did not need to be told twice. "Goodbye, then, and goodbye to you too, Heidi," she said quickly, and hurried down the mountain to Dorfley. She was quite disgusted when nearly everyone she met stopped her to ask about the child. "What? You left her with the Alm uncle? How could you do so? The poor little soul!" were the exclamations she heard on every side. Deet pushed on as fast as she could go and was glad to leave the village behind her. She did not feel quite easy in her own conscience, for the dying mother had given the child to her. But she quieted her misgivings by telling herself that she would soon be earning a great deal of money and could do something again for Heidi. And the next chapter is called At the Grandfather's, which is where we'll pick up when we come back. Bye.